When we're talking about abortion, one of the most commonly asked questions surrounds bodily autonomy and the right of the woman to choose medical procedures and whether or not the fetus can use her body to survive. A commonly quoted court case surrounding this issue is McFall v. Shimp. Now, McFall was an asbestos worker who developed aplastic anemia, which would kill him unless he found a suitable bone marrow donor. The only acceptable donor at the time was his first cousin Shimp. However, Shimp refused. McFall proceeded to take Shimp to court over this. However, the judge, Judge John P. Flaherty Jr., denied forcing Shimp to do the bone marrow transplant. For our law to compel a defendant to submit to an intrusion of his body would change every concept and principle upon which our society is founded. To do so would defeat the sanctity of the individual and would impose a rule which would know no limits, and one could not imagine where the line would be drawn. Abortion supporters point out that the judge determined that the courts could not force a person to undergo an intrusion of their body and donate part of their body to keep another person alive. Therefore, the law can't force women to donate their uterus to keep their children alive. Now, the first major issue here is the issue of responsibility. We all know, acknowledge, and even admit in our laws that parents have a basic level of responsibility to their children. They are expected to keep their children safe, healthy, and alive, and failure to do so often results in criminal charges. In fact, there are some laws that even go so far as to state that a parent is expected to put themselves at risk of bodily harm in the interest of protecting their child, much in the same way that a pilot would be expected to go the extra mile, even if it means putting himself at risk, in order to protect the people on the flight. It's because the parent is in a very particular caretaker role and the child depends on them. It is expected that the parents meet that need. In stark contrast, Shimp was not responsible for McFall. Whatever we might think about how terrible or unethical his decision was, whatever we might think about that is irrelevant. He was not McFall's caretaker. He wasn't responsible for keeping McFall safe, healthy, or even alive. And that's a central issue here. McFall was not reliant on Shimp. Shimp was not his caretaker. However, a mother is responsible for the well-being of her child. Now, another huge component comes down to active versus passive participation in somebody else's death. Let me illustrate. Let's say you're walking down the road and you pass a building that's on fire. You hear somebody screaming for help from within, but you choose not to go into the burning building. Of course, you are expected to alert the authorities so that they can do something about this problem. But if it was later found that the person you heard screaming died due to smoke inhalation or burn injuries or something else related to the fire, you would not be found criminally guilty for their death. Why not? Well, because you didn't cause it. You may have refused to do something that could have saved them. Maybe if you had run into the burning building, you could have saved their life and they'd live happily ever after, you ride off in the sunset or something like that. Maybe you could have saved them, but you're not expected to go save a random person from a fire. At worst, you were passively participating in their death. You simply failed to stop it. Now, in stark contrast, let's say you tied a person up, threw them in the basement, locked the door, then set the building on fire. Well, now you're guilty of murder. Our courts would find you guilty and probably punish you quite heavily because you are actively participating. You are using the fire to kill a person. Now, in the case of McFall v. Shimp, Shimp was passively involved in McFall's death. His refusal did not directly kill McFall. McFall died because of the disease. Shimp might have been able to save McFall, yes, just as you may have been able to save that person from the burning building if you had run in. But just as you were not responsible for that hypothetical person's death, Shimp is also not responsible for McFall's death. Now, if he were to inject McFall with some sort of toxin to give McFall a disease so that McFall dies, now he's responsible. Now he's a murderer because he was actively involved in McFall's death. That makes sense? Active involvement, passive involvement, they're not the same. When a doctor sits down at the abortionist table to perform an abortion, he is intentionally and directly ending the life of the unborn child. His purpose is to stop one of those two beating hearts. He knows he succeeded when he has a dead child on his table. Now, there are a lot of things we can't legislate, but we can legislate that you are not allowed to poison someone to death, starve someone to death, or rip them to shreds. We can also legislate that you are not allowed, and we have legislated that you are not allowed, to hire someone else to poison a person to death, starve a person to death, or rip them to shreds on your behalf. And as soon as we recognize that that's what abortion is, then it becomes necessary for us to legislate abortion the same way we do any other form of murder. Now, do I think all women who have had an abortion are murderers? Absolutely not. That's insane. Most women who had an abortion have been deceived, they've been lied to, they've been coerced, they're scared, they're frightened, and they're being profited off of and taken advantage of by the abortion industry. That's what we need to fight against.